I'm Dr. Miriam Omolo, the Executive Director with the African Policy Research Institute. And one of the things we do or stand for at the Institute is a multidisciplinary approach to solving our public policy issues. By my background, I am an economist. And for a long time, I knew that all problems are solved from an economic perspective. But having been able to learn, I've realized that this cannot be the case. We need different experts in different areas. And one of the key players in solving this problem is the media or the business journalists, because there's a way you highlight issues that someone like myself, even though I'll generate the information, I cannot communicate it the way you do. So it's very important that we work together, and I think this is one very good initiative that brings out such issues. These are some of the key questions that were asked and the objective of this meeting. One of the issues that we are trying to look at is how do you link the national and county fiscal strategy? And at some point you might think they are not related. But at the national level, you have the budget policy statement. It comes from the PFM Act, that's section 25. And it has to be submitted to the National Assembly by the 15th of February. And it has several objectives, as has been put. You have to assess the current state of the economy, and that is what is going. You will find there's a document that's already going around. You look at the financial outlook, what are the revenues, expenditures, and that's what we are highlighting currently. And then the expenditure ceilings, or what we call the budget, the ceilings. You don't go beyond this is how you budget. That is very important, and it has to be all the arms of government. Fiscal responsibility in the medium term, the issues of total or annual debt have to be addressed in that document, and then the statement of specific fiscal risks. And the risks also, here is where we are having even the issues of debt, which are very, very important. And unfortunately for me, as someone who's been analyzing this work for a while, what's on paper is very good. And I ask myself, why are we panicking? Because we can manage it, and as is also looked at other countries, we are not badly off, but where is the problem? If we go to the counties have what we call the County Fiscal Strategy Paper, which they have to produce by the 28th of February, and it's in the PFM Act as well. Now, this County Fiscal Strategy Paper is similar to what we'll call our budget, because that's where the budget is, that's where the ceilings are, the sector ceilings as I call, or what they've budgeted for is included there. And it has to be aligned to the budget policy statement from the national government. I've had the opportunity of working with several counties, and right now all of them are focusing on the big four. And this document is a pure political process. I've come to appreciate that. It's no longer an economic tool. It's a political tool. So you try and bring in your economic profession or your professional aspect as an economist or an accountant to this process. But never ever think of it as an economic tool for development. No, it is political. And why I say it's political, I'll not name a county that have been giving technical support. The objective was, you've done your county fiscal strategy paper, you've taken it to Parliament. The law says, now from what the Parliament has approved, you do your program-based budget estimates. So as a technical person, you walk in and the first thing I expect to see is the approved document from Parliament or from the County Assembly. They tell you, no, we'll work with what we sent. So that's a breach already. Then what happens is when they take it back to Parliament, to the County Assembly, the County Assembly will say this is not what we approved. So they start having back and forth, trade-offs. But the strategy is so that you appease the County Assembly, you don't touch their budget. So the budget will take a very long process, which is not necessary. That's why I call it an economic tool. One of the questions was, okay, what are our priorities? And I think you've heard of the Big Four agenda. the affordable housing, we need 500,000 houses, and some time back, I think through the media interviews, we were explained to how do we want to generate funds. The housing levy, it's still in court, and I saw it's still been extended. There's universal health care, there's manufacturing and food security. And these are very good plans. Now, someone for me, in my opinion as an expert, looking at this, if we followed them well, according to what's on paper, it will work very well. Because one, you need to create jobs. You need also to, when you have good health, you will be fine. You can work. It improves inequality that is quite high in poverty. But a common thread, and being business journalists, some of the things I can tell you to start looking at very well. If followed well as per the paper, these are key sectors to reduce poverty, to increase incomes, to create more jobs. But one common thread in all this Big Four agenda is procurement. This is a political tool. So there is procurement. And if you start looking at housing, if you want to construct a house, you want to start looking at who will procure the materials. Start looking at the laws that are being amended from the time we had the Big Four on professional services that touch on the Big Four. Now, those are areas to start helping us seal loopholes so that when we are taking loans, they become productive. Now, those are areas you need to start looking at because they affect how we are going to implement our budget, and we'll be debating about these strategies every day. So again, just as mentioned, these are the priority areas, and they are in the medium term, the third medium term plan. Very good the way they've been presented. And the expected outcomes: inclusive growth, which is sustainable, increased opportunities for productive jobs, and reduction in poverty. What are the enablers? The legal reforms and institutional reforms across the Big Four. There is collaboration with counties, which is also required, and especially in attracting investments. And one of the things the county government and national government are doing is that the county governments are providing the land for building houses. The national government is facilitating through creating a very conducive atmosphere. There are waivers and on taxes and everything. There are so many, almost 4 pages of what the government is going to do on the Big Four, which are even in the policy statement. And then one thing the government is trying to do is to establish this public investment management unit, which is going to enhance efficiency and the implementation of these projects. Now, this sector, what happens is that you find, we'll say a road was constructed, and on paper it was constructed. But when you go to the road, there is no road. So that unit is supposed to be looking at such issues. If we look at our budget again, total revenues, we have the ordinary revenues, appropriations in aid, and then there's income tax, import duty, and excise, which was already elaborated previously. And as you can see, the revenues are actually increasing, and comparing 2019, the estimates, to 2018 and 2017, those are 17% increase. And by the way, these figures, as I had mentioned, they are very hard to read. Because sometimes you're like billion, trillion, and you have to look at how they're presented, even in the document. And as writers, these are things you really need to look at. The devil is in the details. So even how the presentation is done is very important. And if you want to look at, we've talked about it now, what are some of these revenue enhancement initiatives the government is doing? There is modernization of tax bill that is already going on. I'm yet to see that bill, what it entails, and it's supposed to address the bottlenecks and issues of compliance as well. Another thing on the tax administration and compliance, there's already this enhanced cargo scanning so that you detect concealment and also increase efficiency. And for those of you who've traveled, I don't know whether that's part of it, but right now there's this big ugly machine at the airport where you have to pass your suitcase. And I'm asking myself, is this the best way? Is this where money is really going away? Because I could be buying 5 pairs of shoes for my relatives, but that is not where the leakage is. And then there's the use of regional electronic cargo tracking system, and this one is under what they call the trade facilitation initiatives because we are a regional hub. There are some cargoes that are supposed to move from the port and they are destined for Rwanda, but you find they find their way into their markets. Then third-party identity information and non-compliance with developers. This is meant to enlarge the tax base. As you had said, we have over 19.6 voters. Only 3 are supposed to be paying taxes. So basically, that's almost 20% or so are carrying 100%, which is not fair. Then detection of non-compliance through iTax and data matching. And now we also have Huduma. I don't know, I've not seen anything mentioned about Huduma in the current budget, but that's an initiative that we should see where does it feature. So now these are some of the things you also need to look at as business journalists. So talking about expenditure, which had also been elaborated, and there was more details, again, you can see it has been growing, 2.56 trillion. That is what we had in 2018-19, and then it was previously that's 2018-19. Now the estimate is 2.71. The first question we need to ask ourselves, the law requires that we have a balanced budget. What you've budgeted for equals what revenues you're expecting. So why are we having this big debt because of deficits? Now, those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. Why aren't we adhering to that rule of a balanced budget? When you go to counties, moving from national level, that's one thing they always have to adhere to, and their budget will not be approved by the controller of budgets if that principle is not adhered to. So why is there a loophole for us that we don't have a balanced budget? Then here now we are talking about the deficits, and as you can see, the deficits you have is basically equal to what you're borrowing. And if we move from 2015, you can see it went up from 517 billion, 546, 16, 17, 620.8, 17, 18, it peaked in 2018, 19, and now we are at 578. And a good proportion of it, the part in blue, is foreign financing. And the part in yellow is domestic financing. Is this the best mix? Because there are some loans that everyone is crying about China. Are they concessional or non-concessional loans? Are they short-term or long-term? Now, those are the issues that even as we go beyond this budget, you need to start interrogating as business journalists. So if we look at the fiscal deficit, it's very high currently. Even though the national government is very optimistic that this ratio will decline to 3.1% by 22-23, in line with the East African Monetary Union Protocol, which puts the ceiling at 3%. And they've given a trajectory that it should go down, but it will not just go down. We need to have some initiatives that will make it go down. And as I said, everything looks very good on paper, but when it comes to implementation and the problems, the challenges, even if you look at the control of budget reports, the challenges are the same. A common challenge that you'll find that is affecting our budget is politically correct. They say a weak vote book. When you say a weak vote book, you ask yourself, okay, what is this? But it basically means that the budget holder, and I'll give the example of counties, who is supposed to be the director, who is the one implementing the projects, and the chief officer, that is where the tug of war begins. when the budget is done, the director of that department is in charge. But when implementation comes, in most cases, it's the chief officer who's in charge. Implementation of those projects as envisioned and led by the director will not happen. Projects will be done on expenditures that were not even budgeted for but still fall within that line. And then you find that we've not implemented our activities well. There are high pending bills. And that is why you see, how did we even have pending bills? There are too many payments that have not been done. In the billions, I think, currently. If you look at any report, it will say weak vote book. But for me, weak vote book really hides so many things. And then deficit financing, again, as we've seen, is being done by public guaranteed debt. And this is an area of great concern. Everyone is talking about it because now we are at 53% of GDP. And if you look at the previous statistics, what's happening is that the deficit is ranging from a greater proportion, 50 to 67% is foreign financed. The rest is sourced domestically. Then the stock, again, it comprises of loans from multilateral, bilateral and commercial creditors. This makes up 25.6% of GDP. Then domestic, which is basically treasury bills and bonds, 24.7%. Then the others, where you have suppliers credit, CBK, overdrafts, this is 2.3%. And this one is not dealt with much in the medium term debt strategy, perhaps because it's local and it's more on just financing. So asking ourselves about sustainability. The analysis shows that we are still safe. Safe in the sense that the debt distress is low. But how will we make sure it goes down? That is the question. Because currently, even though we are safe, we are vulnerable to two things. Even though they say it's low, export shocks, it will increase that debt, and an exchange rate shock. This is what has been provided so far by the IMF. And what the national government is doing to mitigate these debts, one of them is to reduce the external financing. As you noticed previously, foreign financing is much higher, but now they want to put it at 38 to 62. So 62 is domestic financing. Then external debt also, they are looking at concessional is proposed so that we have 26% concessional, semi-concessional is 8%, and commercial is 4%. What happens with that is that the rate of interest paid becomes lower. Treasury bonds also will remain a source for the funding. I mean, these are part of the debt mitigation strategies. But for me, I think let us seal the loopholes in corruption. Then we have all the resources that we need to pay our debts. In fact, I think what is stashed out of this country, out of corruption, is enough to pay this debt. That's an area that, as business journalists, I would advise you to start looking into. So let's go to the next one here, tax incidence, because one of the questions that was asked was, who is bearing this burden? And I just picked these from work that was just done recently by the World Bank, where if you look at wines and spirits and mineral water, and look at how much it is in Kenya shillings, what we get as excise tax. And let's look at 2016. There's 2015-16. This was data that was removed from the recent household survey, 2015-16. You will notice that the biggest share of excise tax, of course, beer, and then interestingly, airtime. So as long as you're using airtime, you're bearing that tax burden. Who uses more airtime? So who is bearing that tax burden? What proportion of the population take beer? And what proportion of the population use airtime? You can already see who is bearing the burden of that tax. It's the average Kenyan. This data, what it was looking at is this is for all the households that were surveyed in Kenya. Then it was divided by quintiles, the poorest 20%, the next 20, like that up to the top 20. So all excise taxes as a share of total expenditure. So out of how much money, what they do is you consume this amount of goods which have excess tax. So definitely you're paying excise tax. So what percentage of your household expenditure goes to excise tax? That is what this table graph is explaining. And as you can see, the 20% pay almost 1%, but the top 20 are the ones who bear a good burden, which is almost 2.5%. If we look at wines, or let's take the yellow one, beer, you notice that it's the top 20% that have a higher expenditure on excise, but this is also because they are the ones who consume these commodities more. The share of VAT in total expenditure, and here what the analysis looks like, there's VAT, there's zero exempted or zero rated goods, these basic commodities, and share of VAT in total expenditure. For zero rated again, you find that the expectation is that the poorest should have a higher expenditure in terms of those commodities that are zero rated. That means that they are really benefiting from zero rated commodities. But it's the richest 20%. And as you can see, the graph is moving from the bottom 20 to the highest. And then the 16%, that is VAT items that are basically charged 16%, the highest proportion of income, expenditure of their share of VAT. The richest have a higher percentage, almost 10%, but the ones who are not so, the 20% poorest, have around, let's put it at 8 or so, 8 point something. So what this shows, and we can say, is that VAT is not progressive in the sense that the VAT is being paid, and especially the zero rated, but the poor are not gaining. It should be that the poor are gaining more than those who are well off, but that is not happening. So when you're doing some writing on issues of VAT, you ask yourself, is it pro-poor? The tax proposals we are having right now on whichever goods will be there, will they gain the poor? The answer is no, from the data we see. This one was now the share of expenditure in total consumptions of items identified by type of VAT. Now there are those who are 16%, those that are exempt, those are zero rated. And if you notice, if we go by this is the whole country, whatever is being consumed by households, the share of expenditure for those that are 16% is around 20, this could be around 24 or so. And again, you apply the same principle like we did. Who is gaining more? The bottom 20%, their share of expenditure, what the goods they consume that have 16% VAT is around 20, maybe 22%. But if you look at the top 20%, the graph at the end, where you see T20%, that's top 20%, that figure is almost 30. When we look at exempt again, the commodities that households consume that are exempt. It's quite big also, but in the range of 20s for all. Let us look at zero rated. Zero rated is what is black, and this should be of interest to all of us. What percentage is it of your commodities that you consume that are zero rated? If you look at the second, B20, then 2, 3, 4, you notice that it's small and it grows as you go. So who is gaining from zero rating? is it the poor household, or is it the richest 20%? Now, these figures tell you that in as much as we are advocating for some of these, we really, taxes that are saying pro-poor taxation, you can see that we are not gaining. So, as you can see, expenditure shares of zero rated, that's goods that are too small and they have very little impact. Only 3.1% of the bottom quintile and 6.2% in the top quintile. Then share of exempt items fall from 46.9% among the 20% to 37.2%. So if this is not well targeted, that's what I'm saying, we will not gain from it. The poor typically have lower shares of expenditures in consumption because they rely more heavily on transfers. Where transfers is what you send home. You have your grandmother or your mother or your father is retired, or you have an auntie who you are taking care of. So this is what keeps them going. Then the share of expenditure in total consumption increased from 49.2% among the bottom 20% to 62.9%. Now, this area is an area that can give you a lot of information for those of you who are doing business writing. And this is where you can also have impact. But again, there's a lot of number churning and can be very confusing. So what happens is that, and I'll encourage even the Strathmore Business School, that this is an area where when you start working, you start from the inception so that you understand the concepts as you go on. But these are the main issues that really affect us right now. So we should not just look at budgets per se, but who is benefiting. And just to that was the final slide. Makueni County and Nyandarua County got a good, what is it called? Unqualified, meaning they did well. And everyone is clapping for them, because I don't know the last time I ever heard of a public institution getting an unqualified report. How long ago? Do we have any in the last 10 years?
For the counties, they're the first.
Yes. And for the national government, you'll find there are very few. Then you ask yourself, fine, what that means is that you followed your procedures, you have all the supporting documents, but that's not the end. Who is benefiting from your services? Now, those are issues you need to look at, and the tax incidence or the benefit incidence is what helps you gain this. Thank you very much.